By the third mother that month, I could have finished her sentence for her. Word for word. Same cadence, same little pause after, he just gets these ideas in his head. You know how kids are. Same small laugh at the end that never reached her eyes. I've been a pediatrician for 9 years, the last 4 in a 2-doctor practice off Route 60. It's the kind of town where the pharmacist knows what car you drive and the receptionist went to school with half my patients' parents. In October of 2020, our exam room still had blue painter's tape on the floor for social distancing. Every appointment ran 20 minutes long because of the screening questions, and I was so tired I would sit in my car at lunch and stare at the dashboard instead of eating. That's the context. I want you to hear that first. Because when I tell you what I noticed, I want it clear that I was not looking for a mystery. I was looking for a sandwich and a nap. The first kid was a 7-year-old boy named Owen. Mom brought him in for what she called sleep issues. He was waking up 3-4 times a night, wouldn't go into his own room after dark, wouldn't say why. He had lost about 6 pounds since summer, which on a kid that size is a lot. When I asked him basic questions, he answered fine. Favorite show, favorite food, whether school on the tablet was hard, all normal. Then I asked what was bothering him at night, and he looked at his mom. Not at me, at her. She jumped in fast. He's just been anxious with everything going on, the news, the mask thing at school, you know. He gets these ideas in his head sometimes, kids his age. I nodded. I wrote it down. Anxiety, situational, possible pandemic related. I gave her the standard sleep hygiene handout and told her to come back in 3 weeks if it didn't improve. She thanked me twice and steered Owen out with a hand flat between his shoulder blades. Second kid, 10 days later. Girl, 9, named Casey. Different last name, different insurance, but I recognized the address on her intake form. Same little grid of streets on the north side of town, up past the old feed store. Casey had started chewing the skin around her thumbnails until they bled. She wasn't sleeping. She had stopped talking at school, which was new. Her dad came in with her, and I remember thinking how tightly he was holding her jacket in his lap, folding and unfolding one sleeve. I asked Casey what was going on. She looked at her dad. He said, "She's just been anxious with everything going on. She gets these ideas in her head sometimes. Kids her age." I didn't move my pen for a second. I wrote it down slowly, exactly the way he said it. Then I looked back up and asked if I could speak to Casey by herself for a minute. Standard practice. Nothing unusual. His face did a small thing, not quite a flinch. He said sure, of course, and stepped out into the hall. The second the door closed, Casey put her hands in her lap and looked at the floor. I gave her the usual soft questions. Anything at home worrying you? Anyone making you feel unsafe? Anything you want to tell me that stays between us unless you're in danger? She didn't shake her head. She didn't nod. She just looked at the seam where the linoleum met the wall, and she waited. Not scared, exactly. Waiting for the appointment to be over the way you wait out a red light. I brought her dad back in. I gave him the same handout I'd given Owen's mother. I watched him fold it into thirds before it was even in his hand. The third one was what made me stop pretending I hadn't seen it. Boy, 8, named Jackson. Different family again, same neighborhood. This time it was Grandma who brought him, said Mom was working. Jackson had bald patches at his temples where he'd been pulling out his own hair. He hadn't spoken above a whisper in 2 weeks. Grandma sat down and, before I asked anything, said, "He's just been anxious with everything going on. He gets these ideas in his head sometimes." Word for word. I want to be honest about what happened in my head at that moment because it's important. My first thought wasn't fear, it was embarrassment. That flush you get when you realize you might be about to make a fool of yourself in front of a colleague. Because the professional read on 3 anxious kids in one neighborhood in a pandemic year is 3 anxious kids in one neighborhood in a pandemic year. That's it. That's the boring answer, and boring answers are almost always the right ones. But the sentence bothered me. I finished the visit. I referred Jackson for a follow-up. Then I went back to my office, closed the door, and pulled the last 2 months of charts. I looked for the north side zip code, the 2 or 3 streets I kept seeing on intake forms. I found 6 kids, ages 6 to 11, 3 different pediatric complaints on paper, all really the same underlying thing when you looked past the referral reason. Sleep disruption, new onset anxiety, selective mutism in 2 of them, weight loss in 4, trichotillomania in 1, skin picking in another, 6 kids, 4 different last names, same handful of streets. I called the parents in for what I told them were routine follow-ups, spaced across the next week. I wanted to hear the sentences again with my ears open. I heard them. Not identical every time, but close. He gets ideas. She gets these thoughts. You know how kids are, they make things up. Every parent explained the child's behavior before I asked. Every one of them used the word ideas or thoughts. Every one of them laughed the same short laugh at the end, the one that's really a full stop with a sound attached. and every one of the kids, when I got them alone, did the same thing. Looked at the floor, waited. I want to say I confronted someone. I didn't. I'm a pediatrician in a small town. I have exactly enough credibility to be believed about ear infections, and exactly enough to be run out of town on a rail if I accuse the wrong parent of the wrong thing. And I still didn't know what I was accusing anyone of. I only knew that 6 children had been coached, and coached by more than one adult, because the sentences were too consistent to come from a single household. I did 2 things. First, I called a friend from residency who'd gone into forensic pediatrics down in Charlotte. I didn't give her names. I gave her the pattern, the scripted parental explanations, the child affect, the geographic cluster. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "You need to call it in, not as a doctor, as a person who saw what you saw, anonymously if you can. Let them decide what it is." Second, I called the Child Protective Services intake line from my personal cell on my lunch break, sitting in that same car in that same parking lot. I gave the addresses, I gave the ages, I gave the sentence, word for word, 3 ways. I asked them not to use my name unless they had to, because if the families found out the pediatrician had reported them, none of them would ever bring their kids back to any doctor again, and I couldn't do anything to help those kids if they disappeared from the system. The intake worker was kind. She said she understood. She said they'd send someone out on what they called a welfare check, low-key, in the guise of a general community wellness visit that CPS was doing that fall because of the pandemic. I don't know if that program actually existed or if she invented it on the phone. I didn't ask. Then I waited. It was the worst part. I kept seeing those kids on my schedule, and I kept doing the same handouts and the same referrals and pretending my hands weren't shaking sometimes when I wrote them out. 3 weeks later, a detective called the office and asked if I could come in and answer some questions in a professional capacity. He was careful with me. He never told me who reported what. He asked about medical findings. He asked whether, in my clinical judgment, the pattern I documented across those charts was consistent with coordinated coaching of the children by adults. I said yes. He asked if I would be willing to say that under oath if it came to it. I said yes. What they found, I only know in pieces, from the parts that ended up in the affidavit and the parts my friend from Charlotte helped me read after. There were 4 adults involved. Not all of them were parents. 2 of them didn't live in any of those houses. They had been running something with the kids, using the kids as pieces of it, and they had drilled the parents on what to say if anyone asked. The word the prosecutor used more than once was scripted. That was the whole reason the sentences matched. The parents were reciting. The charges were psychological in nature and financial in nature, and I'm not going to describe the mechanics of it because it isn't mine to describe, and because the kids are still kids, and the case files are still sealed for their sake. I testified twice. Once at a preliminary hearing, once at the trial itself. I sat in a wooden chair and I read from my own notes, and I said the sentence out loud, all 3 versions, and the room got very still when I did. I still practice in the same town. 2 of those 6 kids came back to see me last spring, with a different adult in the room each time. They talked to me, not a lot, but they answered my questions themselves, and they looked at me when they did it, and one of them asked if I had any of those stickers with the dinosaurs on them, because she remembered them from before. I gave her 2. I don't fly. I never have. It's one of those things I'd told people at parties when it came up, half laughing about it, like it was a quirky character detail instead of what it actually was, which was a real fear that had shaped my life since I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Every family trip growing up, we drove. Every college break, I took the bus or begged a ride from someone. When I moved to New York after school, I took Amtrak up and down the East Coast for 4 years without a second thought. 26 hours on a train? Fine. 2 days in a Greyhound with a guy who kept clipping his nails? Whatever, that was normal for me. So when the job called and said the client meeting in LA had been moved up and I had less than 48 hours to be there, and it was March 2022 and half the world was still weird from the last 2 years, I sat in my apartment in Queens and stared at my phone for a long time. My boss said the words, "You have to fly." Not asked, said. I remember booking the ticket at like 3 in the morning. JetBlue, JFK to LAX, direct. I picked an aisle seat because I read online that aisles feel less trapped. I did not sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers with my shoes still on and watched the ceiling fan turn and tried to make deals with myself about breathing. The morning of, I got to JFK 2.5 hours early. I ate a bagel I didn't want. I paced around Terminal 5 like an idiot until my legs hurt. When they finally called boarding, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone getting the boarding pass up. Some kid behind me picked it up and gave it back and said, "You good, man?" And I said, "Yeah, first flight." and he laughed, not mean, just surprised, like he couldn't imagine being my age and never having done this. The jet bridge smelled like carpet and hot metal. I remember looking down at that little gap where the bridge meets the plane and seeing the actual concrete 100 feet below and thinking that was the last moment I could turn around. Then I stepped over it. My seat was 24C aisle. The window seat was empty. The middle seat had a woman in it already, maybe 70, maybe a little older, with silver hair pulled back and one of those soft cardigans that older women wear on planes because they're always cold. She had a paperback in her lap and reading glasses on a chain. She smiled at me when I sat down, the small, polite smile you give a stranger, and went back to her book. I could not sit still. I buckled the belt 3 times. I checked the pocket in front of me for the safety card, then put it back, then took it out again. My mouth was dry in a way water didn't fix. The flight attendant did the demonstration with the mask and the whistle and the little life vest. And I heard maybe 1 word in 5 because my ears were doing this weird thing where all the sounds inside my head were louder than the sounds outside of it. We pushed back from the gate. The plane rolled. I gripped both armrests. I did not mean to grip the one on the middle seat side, which was her armrest, technically, but my hand was just there. The engines went up. That noise. That specific noise a jet makes when it starts really wanting to go. I closed my eyes. I felt the plane turn onto the runway and stop, and then the engines went up again, all the way this time, and we started to move. And every bad thing I had ever imagined about being in an aluminum tube going 500 miles an hour was happening at once behind my closed eyes. I don't remember the wheels leaving the ground. I remember the tilt, that awful moment when the floor is not the floor anymore, and your body knows physics is happening, and the whole cabin is climbing at what feels like a wall. Something in the overhead bin clunked. A baby a few rows up started crying. I made a sound. I know I made a sound because I heard it, this small hurt noise from my own throat that I would have been embarrassed about if I had any room left in me to be embarrassed. Then a hand, warm and thin and very light, rested on top of mine on the armrest. She didn't grab it, she didn't squeeze. She just put her hand there, on top of my knuckles, the way you'd rest your hand on a book you were about to open. I opened my eyes. She was looking at me, not with pity, not with concern even, just looking, the way you look at someone you already know. Her reading glasses were folded on top of her paperback now. "Do you like coffee?" she said. I blinked at her. The plane was still climbing. My stomach was still up in my chest somewhere. I opened my mouth and closed it. I said, "What?" "Coffee," she said again. "Do you drink it?" I nodded, because that seemed easier than talking. She turned in her seat and lifted a hand, and the flight attendant, who had been strapped into her jump seat, unbuckled the second we hit the altitude where you're allowed to move around. The woman next to me asked for 2 coffees, one with cream, one with sugar, and then she looked back at me and said, "Which one?" And I said, "Sugar," and that was the whole conversation. While we waited for the coffee, she didn't say anything about the flight. She didn't tell me the odds of a crash. She didn't tell me pilots are professionals. She didn't say breathe, or it's okay, or you're doing great. She opened her paperback, then closed it again, and asked me if I had ever been to Los Angeles. I said no. She said her oldest grandson lived in Pasadena, and did I know it? And I said only from movies, and she said that was about right. That was basically what Pasadena was. Movies and traffic, and one really good bakery near where he lived that made almond croissants she thought about all year. The coffee came. 2 little paper cups on 2 little napkins. She held mine while I got the tray table down because my hands were still not doing what I told them to do. She didn't comment on that either. She talked about her grandkids, 4 of them. The oldest in Pasadena, an engineer, unmarried, which is fine. I keep telling his mother it is fine. A granddaughter in Denver who had just gotten a dog, a big shaggy thing, half something and half something else, from a shelter. Twin boys in Ohio, 10 years old, one of them obsessed with dinosaurs, the other one obsessed with a video game she couldn't remember the name of. She said the dinosaur one had corrected her, gently, at Christmas, when she called something a brontosaurus, and had explained, with the seriousness of a small professor, that brontosaurus wasn't really a thing anymore, and it was actually a patasaurus, and how she'd said, "Well, that's news to me," and he'd patted her arm. I drank my coffee. It was too hot at first, and then it was fine. She had her cream one, and she held it in both hands, the way people hold coffee in movies about winter. She talked about her husband a little, not a lot. He was gone, I gathered, but she said it without weight, like weather. She told me he used to be scared of dogs, actually terrified, from something that happened when he was 6, and that he had learned to live around it by never making a big deal out of it, by just quietly crossing the street when he needed to. She said that was one of the things she'd loved about him, that he had a fear and he just walked around it and it didn't run his life. She didn't look at me when she said that. She was looking at her coffee. I noticed anyway. At some point, I realized I was not gripping the armrest anymore. My hand was flat on the tray table, next to the empty cup. The plane had been in the air for I don't know how long, an hour, maybe more. There was that low, steady sound a plane makes in cruise, the one you stop hearing after a while, and I had stopped hearing it. She kept talking. The granddaughter with the shaggy dog had sent a video. The dinosaur boy had a loose tooth. The engineer grandson had a girlfriend now, which she wasn't supposed to know about yet, but her daughter-in-law had told her over the phone last week and made her swear not to say anything. We landed at LAX in the late afternoon, that flat gold California light coming through the windows, and I didn't notice the descent until my ears popped and I realized the ground outside the window had gotten close. She was in the middle of a story about the twins and a birthday cake. She finished the story after we touched down. It was a good story. I laughed. I actually laughed. At the gate, standing up, getting our bags from the overhead, she told me she had a connection to Phoenix. Different terminal, different airline. She said it the way you'd mention what you were having for lunch. I said thank you. I said it too many times actually, 3 or 4 times, in that stupid way you do when you know thank you is not really the right size for the thing. She patted my arm the way I imagined she had patted the dinosaur grandson. She said, "Enjoy Los Angeles," and she went one way in the terminal and I went the other. I never got her name. I thought about it later, standing at baggage claim, watching the belt turn. I could have asked. There were probably 20 different points in that flight where asking would have been natural. I just didn't. I was too busy drinking my coffee and hearing about a dog in Denver. I've flown a bunch of times since then. It's still not my favorite thing. My hands still do something weird at takeoff. I still don't like it, but I fly. I get on the plane and I sit down and I fly. I've been a fire safety inspector for the city of Orlando since 2017. Strip malls, standalone retail, restaurants under a certain seat count. Not glamorous work. Most days I'm checking that an exit sign is lit and nobody's stacked cardboard against a breaker panel. This was May 2021. The strip mall sat off South Orange Blossom Trail, one of those long, low buildings painted a cream color that had gone yellow in the sun. Nail place on one end, a phone repair shop, a taqueria called Doña Lupe's, and at the far corner a little gift shop with a hand-painted sign that just said, souvenirs and perfumes. That was on my list. I pulled in around 10 in the morning. Already 90 degrees. My shirt stuck to the seat before I'd even opened the truck door. The place had 2 cars in front and a delivery van around the side with the engine running and nobody in it. The bell on the door was one of those little brass things on a spring. Inside it smelled like potpourri and dust and something else underneath I couldn't place. Air conditioning going hard, shelves packed with the usual stuff, snow globes with plastic alligators, keychains. A whole wall of cologne and perfume bottles, most of them knockoffs of brand names, the letters slightly off. The owner came out from behind the counter as soon as he heard the bell. Older man, maybe 70, thin white hair combed straight back, glasses on a chain, short sleeve button up, tucked into khakis. His name was Marcus, according to the tag on his shirt. He shook my hand with both of his. "Fire inspection," I said. "Just a routine one, won't take long." Of course. Take whatever time you need." He was polite in a way that felt over-rehearsed, like a man who wanted you to notice how polite he was being. He offered me a bottle of water twice in the first minute. I turned it down twice. I did the front of the store first. Exit sign, working. Extinguisher, tagged and current. Aisles mostly clear. He had one small issue with the display of tote bags blocking the panel on the east wall, and I made a note of it. He nodded seriously and said he'd move it that afternoon. He walked with me the whole time, half a step behind. He talked the entire way, about the weather, about tourism picking up again after the previous year, about his grandchildren in Tampa. He named the towns, he named the ages. It was the kind of talk you use to fill silence when you don't want the silence to do its own work. There was a little hallway at the back with a bathroom on one side and a door on the other. Metal door, painted the same cream color as the walls, with a deadbolt and a padlock on a hasp. That was unusual. Most storerooms just have a regular knob lock. "I'll need to see in there," I said. "Oh, the back. Yeah, just a quick look." Marcus stood there for a second with his hand on the wall. Then he laughed a little, more to himself than to me, and started patting his pockets. He pulled out a key ring. He looked through it slowly. He tried a key. It didn't fit the padlock. He tried another. That one didn't fit either. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I know it's on here somewhere." "Take your time." He kept flipping through the ring. 15 keys on it maybe. He held each one up to the light like he was reading a serial number, though the keys were unmarked. After about a minute, he shook his head and looked genuinely apologetic. "You know what? I think Elena has the right one. She was here yesterday reorganizing." "Let me call her." He pulled a cell phone out of his pocket and walked a few steps away, back toward the sales floor. I could hear him talking low, not the words, just the tone, slow, even. He came back after a minute and said Elena would tell him where she left it. He wandered over to the counter and started looking through a drawer. I stood in the hallway and I waited. I've done a lot of these inspections. People stall for all kinds of reasons. Somebody's got a mess in the back they don't want you to see. Somebody's storing product they're not supposed to. So a delay isn't automatically anything. You just wait. But I was watching the clock on my phone. 2 minutes in, he came back with a small paper envelope of keys and started trying those. None fit either. He kept apologizing. He kept his voice light. At one point, he made a joke about how his memory wasn't what it used to be, and he laughed, and I smiled just enough to be polite. 3 minutes. 4. At the 4-minute mark, I heard something from the other side of the door, not loud. A soft thump like something being set down on concrete, then a scrape, then quiet. I didn't look up. I didn't say anything. I kept my eyes on my clipboard, made a small note in the margin, and turned the page. Marcus came back into the hallway. He was sweating a little at the hairline, though the AC was cold, and I wasn't sweating at all. He said Elena was on her way, but she was 10 minutes out, and she'd said to check the little dish on top of the microwave in the break area, because sometimes she put keys there. Sure, I said. He went. I waited. At around the 6-minute mark, he came back with a single key held up like a trophy. Found it, in the dish, just like she said. He unlocked the padlock, then the deadbolt. He had to put his shoulder against the door a little to get it to open, and when it swung in, I stepped forward and looked. It was a storeroom, concrete floor, metal shelving on 3 walls. Cardboard boxes stacked neatly, most of them labeled by hand in Sharpie, toothpaste, sunscreen, beach towels, mini alligators, a mop and bucket in one corner, a utility sink, a small window high up on the back wall with a fan in it, running. Everything looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, except the smell. That undertone I'd caught coming in through the front door was heavier back here. It wasn't potpourri underneath, it was ethanol. Sharp, almost sweet, the way a hospital smells when they've just wiped down a counter, only stronger. Under that, something oilier. The air near the fan moved the smell out steadily, which meant the fan had been on a while, or had just been turned up. I walked the perimeter, checked the extinguisher back there, expired by 4 months. Checked the shelving for anything obviously wrong. Marcus stood in the doorway with his hands folded in front of him, still smiling that polite, tight smile. I noted the expired extinguisher. I noted the padlock configuration, which wasn't a violation by itself, but was worth writing down. I noted the tote bag display out front. Minor stuff. Enough to justify a follow-up in 30 days per protocol, which I marked on my form in his presence. You'll get a copy of this in the mail, I told him, and I'll be back within a month to verify the corrections. Of course. Thank you for your patience. He walked me all the way to the door, shook my hand again with both of his. As I was leaving, the little brass bell went off behind me, and I heard him lock the front door and flip the sign to closed. It was 10:40 in the morning on a Tuesday. I drove 2 blocks and pulled into the parking lot of a Walgreens and sat there with the AC on for a while. I wrote up my notes on the tablet. I didn't write down the smell. You don't write down smells on a fire inspection form. There's no field for it. But I put a flag on the file for an unannounced revisit, which we're allowed to do for any reason or none. A week later, I came back with a colleague named Rob. Thursday, around 3 in the afternoon. Different day, different time, no call ahead. The store was open. Marcus was behind the counter. When he saw me, his face did something small and quick, and then the polite smile came back on top of it. I told him we were here to verify the previous corrections. I told him we'd also need the storeroom. He started patting his pockets. Rob is a bigger guy, ex-Navy, doesn't smile much on the job. He said calmly that we could wait outside with the door open until the key was found, or we could call in the fire marshal's office. Marcus stopped patting his pockets. He walked to the back and unlocked the door in about 11 seconds. What was in there was not what had been in there the week before. The cardboard boxes on the middle shelf were pushed aside, and behind them were plastic jugs. Denatured ethanol, industrial size, at least a dozen. On the floor under the utility sink were more jugs, unlabeled, filled with something amber. On the counter next to the sink was a row of small glass bottles, empty, the same shape as the cologne bottles out front, a funnel, a hand labeling machine, a cardboard tray of caps. No ventilation beyond that one fan, no fire suppression. An electrical outlet 6 inches from the ethanol jugs, with a power strip plugged in and daisy chained to another one. Rob went outside to call it in. I stayed with Marcus in the hallway. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the floor, at a spot near my left shoe, and kept looking there. The store got shut down that afternoon. The investigation took a few months. The amber stuff turned out to be counterfeit fragrance concentrate, and Marcus had been bottling knockoff cologne on site and selling it on the front wall. Our part was the storage. Improper handling of flammable liquids, no permits, no ventilation, no suppression, in a building that shared a wall with a taqueria that had a working kitchen on the other side of it. He got a fine. The shop stayed closed. The thing I remember is the 7 minutes. Standing in that hallway with my clipboard, listening to a soft thump and a scrape, writing a note about a tote bag display, and knowing that a polite old man was on the other side of a door, moving something he did not want me to see.